you lying in bed, staring at the clock and counting down the minutes and wondering why sleep feels so elusive? Well, if so, then this episode is your ticket to understand the secret of sleep. Today, my guests and I will unravel the mysteries of your inner clock.
Circadian rhythm is our body's internal biological clock. It's the rhythms that regulate our physiology, our behavior, our metabolism in roughly 24-hour cycles. So
maybe you are right now using a sleep tracker or maybe any device that can tell you how your quality of sleep is. But the question is, how good are we in tracking the sleep and getting the most information out of it? Is this the new way of personalized sleep medicine?
Another limitation right now is that most current apps, they treat everyone to the same advice, right? Even though we know, especially for people with subclinical issues, their sleep symptoms are so varied, they don't provide a personalized approach. And that's really our differentiation as a company.
If you ever wondered why you're wider awake at midnight or dragging maybe at noon, stay tuned. Get cozy and let's dive into the fascinating science that could transform your nights and your days. Have fun listening while maybe lying in bed and enjoy our conversation.
Daily dose of honest science.
Hello guys and welcome back to Daily Dose of Honest Science, your science channel covering the best biomedical science podcast that you can hear on any podcast. I'm your host Dr. Chani Kumar, and today I have the true privilege to introduce you to Dr. Elie Gottlieb, a renowned sleep and circadian research scientist with over a decade of experience in sleep, circadian rhythm and neuroscience research. He's not just a scientist, but also passionate evangelist of consumer and digital health technologies with a career that bridges both academia and industry. In his current role as the lead applied sleep scientist at SleepScore Labs, Dr. Gottlieb conceptualizes and executes applied sleep and digital health tech studies while also supporting the development of new sleep circadian improvement products and features. Previously, Dr. Gottlieb worked as a research specialist at Johnson & Johnson, contributing to the Lake Nona Life Project, a multi-generational study aimed at identifying factors that contribute to long-term health and wellness. He earned his PhD in neuroscience from the University of Melbourne in Australia and served as a postdoctoral researcher at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health. He continues to be a visiting researcher at the Florey Institute, where he investigates the links between it's a hard one,
cerebrovascular.
Yes, exactly, neurodegenerative diseases and sleep-wake dysfunction. Dr. Gottlieb's expertise spans clinical sleep neuroscience, consumer sleep and health technology, big data, behavior change science, and science communication. It's an honor to have him here with us today to delve into the groundbreaking work in the field of sleep science. A warm welcome and a big applause for Dr. Elie Gottlieb. Hello, Elie.
Hello.
So cool that it worked this time.
It worked. I'm excited to be here.
So first of all, really exciting, and I've read some of the posts that you made on LinkedIn about your lab or the work that you're doing. But before we start, I always ask the question, how did you got into science?
Yeah, I actually started out by studying philosophy and religion, which is not the typical way that many people get in. I was really drawn to big questions. What does it mean to live a good life? How do we find meaning and purpose and fulfillment? And I remember being especially taken to Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia, which is this concept of human flourishing, not just surviving, but thriving. But after a while, I think I realized that I wanted more than thought experiments. I wanted a way to actually, test some of these ideas to see how they actually played out in real life. And that is what led me to psychology, and more specifically to the work of Martin Seligman, which is the founder of positive psychology. I think his approach was really refreshing. It wasn't just about diagnosing or treating what's wrong, but identifying the conditions that help people live better, happier lives. And then, from there, my interest kept narrowing in on the brain, really, like how it regulates mood, how it regulates performance and health. And I really found myself pulled toward neuroscience in particular. That's where sleep first came into the picture. During my undergraduate research, I got involved in research that looked at the effects of blue light blocking lenses and early consumer sleep technologies. At the time, it was called the jawbone up band. And it was a simple study that looked at the effects of those blocking lenses on melatonin, sleep architecture. But I was just really fascinated that we could measure behavior in the real world, right? That we can track it objectively, we can actually see changes. And I think that blend of technology, behavior, and then biology, it really clicked for me. And then I think what really pulled me into science more like long term was just the process itself, the fact that you can have a big question, you can design a study, you can discover something real, even if it's just, a smaller piece of the bigger puzzle, and that someone else can come along and replicate it or build on that idea or disprove it. And it felt like a way of getting closer to the truth, not with a truth with a capital T, but in a cumulative, more ever evolving kind of way, which is what I really wanted when I was first studying religious studies and philosophy. And I think that's what made me really fall in love with science. And then that's what's really, I think, kept me in it ever since.
Of course, neuroscience is not only subjective to sleep. So what was particularly interesting for you that you said, I want to do more sleep research rather
Yeah.
than, I don't know, neurodegenerative or something like that? Or
Yeah, I think honestly, like who isn't fascinated by sleep, right? It's this kind of like universal
Exactly.
behavior, and we still don't understand it, from the outside looking in. It's kind of an idiotic behavior, and I don't mean to sound daft, but like we spend a third of our lives lying unconscious. We're not eating, we're not mating, we're not, foraging for food, we're not socializing, we're completely vulnerable to predators. And somehow evolution has like preserved that function across every species we've studied in some way. And one of the earliest pioneers in the field was Alan Rechtshafen. He put it perfectly. I think he said, if sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it's the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. And I think that line has always like stuck with me. So I always started asking, what is sleep doing that makes it so essential? And that's when I really started to understand and discover how sleep is intertwined with literally every system in the body, right? Our brain health, our immune functioning, we'll talk about that later, our metabolic functioning, our mental health, our performance, you name it, it's everything. And I think what's even more interesting is how it's regulated. It's not just about being tired, it's about this like incredibly sophisticated dance, as we'll talk about later as well, between our circadian rhythm, which is our internal biological clock, and this like homeostatic sleep pressure, right, which builds up the longer that we're awake. And I think that interaction, which plays out every single day in every human, and yet most of us are barely aware that it's even happening. And I think
yeah,
what really hooked me was realizing that sleep isn't just a window into the brain, it's literally our brain in action, doing some of the most essential work that keeps us alive, right? And functioning at a high level. And then that circadian component, it adds this whole other layer. It's not just like how much sleep we get, but when we get it. And that's, I think, a nuance that people are just now starting to really appreciate and understand. So I think for me, sleep and circadian rhythms, they're not just interesting, they're foundational. If you care about human flourishing, if you care about human health and wellness, it's like the ground floor. It's fundamental.
yeah, it's something that people have recognized, that if you don't sleep enough, you're actually harming more than being very productive
Exactly.
later on. What I find very interesting is a previous study was published that our organs have
Oh
inner
yeah.
clock itself. So that was
Every
also
cell in your
quite
every cell in your
interesting.
body does.
Yeah, so that was quite like mind-blowing for me. Therefore, it make totally sense to look at this and decipher what are the most basic functions that we have, and why is sleep still so important for us, not only now in longevity or just for the basic function to be here. And if you know, the brain needs this sleep because it gets out all the toxic stuff that is accumulating, right? So if you don't have good sleep, it also means that you're damaging your brain in
Absolutely. Yeah, the neuroscience of
some
it, we'll
sense,
talk about it later,
right?
what's actually happening in the brain to
Yeah.
help, how is sleep helping our brain?
Mm. On the personal note from your side, when I read your CV, I was pretty excited because you have seen academia and industry. So now you're in industry, and I would love to know, since you're so curious and you want to know things, why in industry and not?
Yeah. Look, I think my career, especially in the sleep space, has always been guided by one question, which is how do we move the science of sleep from the lab to the nightstand? Translation is so important for me. And I started out in academia because I think I just wanted to understand these mechanisms, right? Like how sleep and circadian rhythms shape brain health and all aspects of our health. And I think it gave me, the scientific foundation and rigor to ask the right questions. But over time, I did feel a bit of a disconnect that the insights were very powerful, but they weren't often reaching the people who need them most. And I think that's what really drew me to industry. I wanted to build things. I wanted to build tools and products and experiences that actually help people sleep better. Um, and I'm still involved. I'm very lucky that my role is like this hybrid industry and academic role where I still publish a lot. We have a ton of academic collaborators from NASA to UNC Chapel Hill and a range of academic institutions. But really, my goal has been to be a bridge, right, between sleep neuroscience and behavior change science and product design and narrative clarity for science communication, to take like evidence-based ideas and translate them into solutions that people can understand and trust and actually use. So for me, at least, it's not about choosing between academia or industry. And I know that that's like, that's the binary option now, but I think it's changing. You have many academic institutions that are collaborating with industry and vice versa. But really, it's about combining the strength of both to drive real world impact.
Exactly. Yeah, this is also something that I see in my research currently. So I'm very lucky having a collaboration. I'm not, I cannot talk about it, but I do know that industry has a different leverage to get stuff more efficiently done, maybe even. But yeah, and in your case, I find it very interesting because this position that you are, it's kind of very unique. I don't think that someone would make such a job offer. So it's kind of like you are filling the space because you know both worlds, right? And this is quite interesting to see that you're taking it to the next level. Um, and you mentioned NASA. I know maybe you're not allowed to talk, but I'm just curious to know, is your so your research or your company in general interested also in investigating how the sleep of astronauts are
Yeah,
somehow
I can't share
different?
too much about that collaboration, but
Yeah.
essentially, some people were using our technology, our core measurement technology, in order to measure sleep
Hmm.
in a non-contact way. So high level, that was the
Okay.
collaboration where we essentially
Hmm.
they were leveraging our measurement technology to measure sleep in like an
Mm.
ecologically valid way.
Ah, okay, that's very interesting. Um, So, can you maybe explain to the audience very quickly what is your exact role right now in the Sleep
Yep.
Score Lab, that people understand what are you responsible for? Maybe take also an
Sure. Yeah.
example.
So currently, head of applied science, sleep science at SleepScore, and my goal really is to again help companies bridge sleep science to life, to bring life into those products that people already use and love. I've had a chance to guide some of the world's top companies and leading brands like Therabody and Mattress Firm and International Flavors and Fragrances through our full R&D stack. So that includes everything from early consultation and discovery research to prototype testing to product validation, API integration, leveraging our digital tools into their own platforms, and then ultimately it's also science communication and storytelling. Like how do we bundle all that in a way that resonates with their users? So my focus is really on building end-to-end solutions that can help two sects of the population. The first one is clinical, right? So ensuring that we're screening for clinical sleep issues where it's relevant, because if someone has a sleep disorder, sometimes behavior is not enough. If you have obstructive sleep apnea, you need a CPAP machine, for example. But the truth is, the other sect of the population is what we call subclinical. So these are individuals who don't necessarily have a sleep disorder, but still struggle with falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up, right? Like those kinds of poor sleep quality issues. And the truth is that it's closer to like 50 to 60% of the population that has that subclinical threshold sleep issues, and 15 to 20% that have sleep disorders. So those without a diagnosable sleep disorder, we guide them to better sleep and circadian health through a range of ways and products. So whether it's a connected fitness device or an aromatherapy product or an app, the goal is to embed real time evidence-based science into perspectives and experiences that people already engage with, so that sleep support isn't something extra, it's just part of the experience.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of problems do you see when you do this assessment, let's say? Do you have seen maybe sometimes that a certain device is not doing what it should do? And how do you
Yeah.
tackle that problem? Or that you go into a complete different direction that actually was before not seen? So do you see differences
Yeah,
and
oftentimes it's just an issue that sleep isn't even a core priority, or something that should be integrated into the user experience. So you can imagine a digital health app that is intending to improve physical activity and outcomes related to physical activity and exercise.
Mhm.
Well, we know that 60 to 70% of our growth hormone is actually secreted during slow wave sleep or deep sleep. So if a company isn't leveraging that data, and their
Mhm.
users aren't actually seeing the gains from a muscle perspective that they're looking for, it might actually be as a result of sleep wake dysfunction. So our goal is to
Mhm.
sort of
Mhm.
poke into that hole, fill that hole with sleep. That way, their user
Mhm.
experience can be optimized, and they can get the outcomes that they're already
Mhm.
looking for. That's just one example on the digital
Mhm.
side.
Mm. And when you look at the data that you're
Mhm.
generating now compared to what have been done before, do you think that sleep was neglected for many years and now people are jumping on it
100%.
and you're like,
Yeah, I think it
okay.
for a very long time, sleep was this like burden, right? People were like, "Oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead," or "Sleep is for the weak," right? But we've been very lucky
Mhm.
and blessed with some incredible science communicators like Matthew Walker that have shined a
Mhm.
light on the importance of sleep and have paved the way to, not just companies, but people, right? The global population understanding the importance of sleep. Now, for me, it's about actually
Mm.
integration and creating end-to-end solutions that work and that people love.
Mhm.
Like just education is unfortunately not enough. People need the behavioral tools, products,
Okay.
a triage system that gets them to something that they actually need, use, and want to use every day.
Mm. Mm. And we come to this later, but maybe for the audience to listen to the end, what is the most or the coolest thing that you have achieved till now where you say that's really cool
Yeah,
what we
I
did?
think there's several that we've worked on, but I think what we're really excited about is the recent randomized control trial that we published showing positive care effects and overall efficacy of our digital sleep improvement platform.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the app in
Mhm.
Germany, actually.
Yeah. Yes.
So that
Yeah.
that is a completely personalized and dynamic tool that people can use to improve their sleep quality. And that randomized control trial was successful. And as a result of that trial, we're now fully reimbursed as a digital tool in Germany by the insurance public insurers. So very excited. It's our goal to improve population sleep health at scale. So
Mhm.
73 million citizens now have access to that, which is super exciting.
Yeah. And that's really cool. And we come to this as well. I'm just curious, why Germany?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's the second largest market for healthcare market in the world, which is not many people realize. Um, and
Okay.
Germany, unlike many other countries, really appreciates and acknowledges the importance of preventative health. And so it
Hmm.
was just a perfect fit. They have Diga and a range of other opportunities to
Hmm.
get digital platforms embedded into the healthcare ecosystem to improve population health. And then sleep is obviously a big component of that.
Mm. And what about in Asia? Did you like South
Yeah,
Korea
we're
or
still working
something?
on it. I think a big part of it for us is our governments prioritizing it. Are they making incentives
Ah,
to
mhm,
private companies to go in and provide that at scale? So, our
mhm.
goal eventually is to replicate what we did in Germany all over the world, but we need the government to take initiative there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm quite happy that that it came to such a great outcome. And of course, it will be as like the project, maybe leading to upcoming projects, which is
Yeah.
really important. Um, But what I would like to know as a last question for this little section is, besides this whole sleep research, what are your additional
Yeah,
interests?
I think my goal is really an interest or to create a future where sleep and circadian health are seamlessly embedded, right, into products and experiences that people love and use without requiring them to change their lives or wear additional devices that's uncomfortable. So I think user experience, UI and UX is very
Mhm,
important to me. Behavior change science is super important to me, but it goes into building ecosystems, right? A interconnected
mhm,
ecosystem of products and services and experiences that are not only effective but also engaging.
mm. And do you have maybe other science topics that you're quite
Oh,
passionate about,
yeah,
that doesn't have to be
yeah.
now
Well, luckily
sleep?
for us, sleep health is one health pillar that affects many different physiological functions. In fact, every physiological function is impacted by sleep deprivation. So one
Mhm,
area that's obviously very interesting and important to us, both personally and as a company, is of course like exercise and the effects of
mm,
atrophy, muscle atrophy, and how that's intertwined with
mhm,
sleep, the bidirectional relationship between exercise and sleep. That's really critical because it's sort of an easy win, right? Like if you can
mhm,
improve exercise, you typically improve sleep. If you can improve sleep, you typically improve recovery. So that's obviously an area of great interest.
mm. Okay, awesome. Um, then we conclude with the first section that we get to know Ellie a bit better now. Before we go into your amazing research that you're doing, I would like to give the audience the opportunity to understand what you're working on, and therefore we have to create the
Mhm.
basis for it, right? And very importantly, we have to talk about what the circadian rhythm is and what a chronotype is, because unfortunately nowadays on social media everyone comes with these words and thinks he or she is the expert, but I think it's good when we tell the people what the actual definition is. So first of all, what is the circadian rhythm and what is a chronotype?
So very high level at the simplest, the circadian rhythm is our body's internal biological clock. It's the rhythms that regulate our physiology, our behavior, our metabolism in roughly 24-hour cycles. So every cell in our body has a circadian clock. And circadian rhythm, the term actually comes from Latin, circa diem. It literally means around a day. So your circadian rhythm, it dictates, many of your daily patterns. It influences when you feel awake. It influences when you get sleepy, when you experience peak alertness and performance, right? So you can think of it as like an internal conductor that is orchestrating the symphony of your body's daily functions, making sure that each physiological instrument plays at like the right time. Now, your chronotype is essentially your body's natural preference. We call it the chronotype because it's your body's natural preference to sleep timing. And it's typically genetically determined, and it varies significantly among individuals. You've probably heard of morning larks or evening owls, but it is sort of a spectrum. Most people are neither strong evening types nor strong morning types. They fall somewhere in the middle. So they typically like to go to bed around 11 p.m., wake up around 7 a.m. That's a more intermediate type. But what's I think really cool is that chronotypes aren't fixed, right? Like they can change across our lifespan. With teenagers, they typically, they're generally evening types, and older adults tend to skew towards more morning types. So, I made the analogy earlier of like, the orchestra for the circadian rhythm, that's the symphony of your body's daily functions. For the chronotypes, it's kind of like the individual preference for like music genres, right? So some people inherently prefer classical music, which might be more morning types, and then others find, their rhythm in like jazz or rock, which is more evening types.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. On the very basic level, what are the most important players? And so the audience knows how the circadian rhythm works. So proteins or genes in
And
general.
I know we talked about this earlier, but I'd like to preface by saying that I'm not a molecular expert or like a hardcore biologist per se when it comes to chronobiology. And my work is primarily in the clinical rather than preclinical space, but absolutely happy to walk you through high level. Look, at the center of this entire circadian rhythm system is what's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's this very small region in our brain's hypothalamus. We often call it the body's master clock, because it synchronizes the timing, our internal timing, with the external environment, mainly through the sensing of light, right? Light is arguably the strongest environmental cue that influences our circadian rhythm. And we call these external cues Zeitgebers, right? It's actually a German word as well. Yeah.
German word,
And
yes,
you
yeah.
could think of, back to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, you can think of the suprachiasmatic nucleus like the conductor, right? It's the conductor leading the orchestra. And it ensures that each part of the body performs the right things at the right time. There are many important genes and proteins that help keep that rhythm running, essentially. And the four essential ones are the clock genes, the BML1, PER, which is short for period, and then the cryochrome. And then essentially as PER and cry build up, they essentially they trigger a feedback loop that tells the clock in BML1 to slow down. And then that creates the sort of repeating loop that cycles every 24 hours. And lastly, I think it's important that, the clocks aren't, we spoke about this earlier, the clocks aren't just in your brain, they're found throughout the body, right? So in your heart, in
Exactly.
your liver,
Yeah.
your skin, and your other organs, they all together are helping to conduct really vital functions like digestion and metabolism,
Mhm.
and we'll talk about it later, but especially immune
Mhm.
responses.
Mhm. And you already touched on this, but maybe to tell the people how important it is. So the circadian rhythm, how does it affect
Yeah.
then sleep?
Yeah, our circadian rhythm has a massive effect on our sleep wake patterns and our cycles. It's really one side of the coin. And it does so primarily by controlling the timing of when we feel awake and sleepy. You've probably heard of melatonin. It's typically called the hormone of
Yes.
darkness, and it's directly regulated by our circadian clock. As darkness falls, melatonin levels rise. They signal to the body that it's time to prepare for sleep. And then when daylight returns,
Exactly.
melatonin decreases, it dips. Cortisol
Yeah.
typically rises in the morning, and it's signaling that it's time to wake up. So essentially, our circadian
Mhm.
rhythm really works hand in hand with the other primary sleep system, which is known as our homeostatic sleep drive or sleep pressure, which gradually
Mhm.
increases the longer you've been awake. It's also related to adenosine,
Mhm.
which we can talk about later as well. And
Mhm.
basically, when these two systems are in sync, when you know, we're falling asleep and we're waking up, that happens naturally when the homeostatic sleep
Mhm.
drive and our circadian rhythm are working perfectly. And then, on the other hand, when the circadian rhythm is misaligned, like during jet lag or social jet lag or shift work, that's when it could lead to problems, falling asleep, staying asleep, and a range of physiological, psychological, and medical
Mhm.
problems, which we'll touch on.
Um, what I want to know is there maybe a genetic component that your sleep gets disrupted all the time? Do you think that
Yeah,
exists,
it's
or?
it's there. There's one genetic. It's actually a prion disease. It's called fatal familial insomnia. It's incredibly
Mhm.
rare. It's a prion disease that's essentially degenerating areas of the brain that are responsible for initiating and maintaining sleep. It's a very sad disorder. There's no cure. There's very few cases. Essentially, average age of onset is around 40 to 50. Within six
Mhm.
months or so, people are dead. So as a result of
Wow.
lack of,
Okay.
well, one of the results is lack of sleep, but essentially it is an insomnia type disease, again, very rare, where, yeah,
Mm.
sleep wake centers in the brain completely atrophy. People are unable to sleep no matter what you give them, essentially. And
Mm.
yeah, several months later, we see complete, yeah, metabolic, physiological
Mm. Mm.
dysfunction.
Mhm. Oh, that's super interesting. Unfortunately, it's such a harmful
Yeah.
disease, of course. But do you know why the onset is so
I
late?
don't know exactly why. Like many other diseases,
Mm.
onset time can vary, but the average onset is mid to late 40s. And if you look at families
Mm.
who've inherited this, that
Mm.
is typically when they see it. But I don't know the exact cause, the physiological metabolic cause, why it
Mm.
happens
Mm.
around that age. But it is an average, right? Like, there have been
Mm.
earlier cases in late 30s, later cases in the 50s, but as a prion disease,
Mhm.
it's quite devastating.
Okay. Um, Another question is when we want to study the
Yeah.
circadian rhythm, we usually go back to
Mhm.
animal models. And it's a bit difficult because animal models, of course, don't really reflect our circadian rhythm. So, how translatable are these results that usually people do in mice,
Yeah.
for
Well, I
instance?
will start by saying, like, fruit flies, for example, have been really, really important among chronobiologists and researchers because they go through generations pretty quickly and they show very clear, like, daily activity patterns. Actually, some of the most important
Mhm.
discoveries in the chronobiological space have been made using fruit flies. So we know that for example, the 2017 Nobel Prize what in physiology and medicine was actually by chronobiologists. So it was three chronobiologists for their work uncovering how key proteins like the PER and the cry interact to generate essentially a self-sustaining 24-hour cycle. All this was studied in the fruit flies. Zebrafish are another powerful model. We see this in neuroscience all the time, and it's because their embryos are essentially transparent, and they're used
Hmm.
across neuroscience. We can actually watch the clock turn on and off in real time, which is really cool. And again, I haven't personally worked with these models. My work has been primarily in the clinical
Hmm.
space, working in humans, but they've been clearly provided incredible, valuable insights from a basic science perspective that
Hmm.
obviously are guiding human studies in chronobiology. And it's still it's a relatively novel field. So
Mm.
how much of translation is actually happening is still unclear. But you know, there are absolutely similarities in the high
Hmm.
level sleep wake cycles. What's going to be really important and key to see is whether or not that translates to, for example, chronotherapies. Can we leverage some of that basic science
Hmm.
data into therapies that are timed by someone's chronotype or timed by their
Exactly. Yeah.
their internal circadian rhythm?
Yeah. It was quite interesting because they showed that maybe giving the chemotherapy at a certain time has an effect on how well this chemotherapy helps
It's
against a certain
huge.
cancer. So that was it, something that also blew my mind, that we have to think of this. And now we come a bit more into your expertise because when you consider clinical trials to study the circadian disruption, for instance, what are kind of factors that you have to take into account? Because, of course, every one of us is very individual, but still, what kind of variables would you influence the outcome immensely? So, what would you
Yeah.
say?
Well, look, when we're designing clinical trials or even observational trials, to study the circadian disruption, the timing of the measurement obviously is critical. So circadian rhythms, they naturally, fluctuate throughout the day. So capturing data at consistent times, it really helps us isolate the actual effect versus, something else that might be actually affecting. So whether that's shift work or social jet lag, or another circadian disruptor. So I think it's also very important that we capture age and chronotype, and chronotype. Our research, I'll talk about this later, has shown that social jet lag, which is this discrepancy between weekday and weekend or work-free sleep patterns, it really
Mm.
significantly varies with these variables. We found that, social jet lag, for example, it steadily decreases across the lifespan. It becomes a lot
Mm.
more obvious, much less obvious after retirement. Um, there are other lifestyle factors like caffeine consumption, alcohol consumption, stress levels, of course, can influence our circadian rhythm. I think so. These need to be carefully controlled for as well. In our recent analysis
Mm.
in the social jet lag paper, we found that those behavioral factors tend to influence the social jet lag in general, but age, was the primary predictor, the strongest predictor in our model. And I think this
Yeah.
just underscores
Okay.
how crucial it is for these behavioral models to be accounted for. But clearly, age
Mm.
and life stages are fundamental. And then I think another one
Mm.
is measuring sleep in the natural environment, right? Rather than exclusively
Yeah.
like in a laboratory. I think
Yeah.
home measurement gives us a much more like realistic, ecologically valid snapshot of how people are actually sleeping under typical conditions. I don't know if anyone, yourself or listeners have had an overnight sleep study in a lab, but it can be incredibly invasive. There's 30, 40 plus sensors attached to your body. It's incredibly
Yes.
invasive. And the same can be true for some wearable devices. Many people uh, don't like to sleep with an Apple Watch or another device. They find it that
Mm.
textile,
Mm.
unnerving, or they don't really appreciate it. So for us, in our work at SleepScore, we've leveraged a lot of non-contact technologies that are still able to accurately measure sleep in the home and provide ideally more reliable insights into how people are actually sleeping
Mm.
without having to touch the body, and gather some really useful insights from that.
Mm. Mm. And are you leveraging also data on like genetic background, like the genotype of the patient
Yeah,
and
ye-
or
s-
the
s- yeah. So not quite yet. I think it's an interesting area. It's hard to capture a lot of that data in a non-invasive way. Obviously, we do have some screeners and some self-reported questionnaires where people can answer about their chronotype, preferences, goals, motivations, a range of factors. But because we're also not a medical device per se. We're more of a consumer product. We try to be very
yeah.
careful about questions that we ask. But ideally, in
Hmm.
the future, we would have, especially for precision medicine, we would have some link
Yeah,
with that
exactly.
genetic data in order to estimate someone's actual sleep need, which we might be able to get from genetic
Mm.
data. And then, of course, the genetic
Mm.
data would be a better indicator of someone's circadian preference rather than just self-report.
Mm. And how much would you say does stress level play a big role
Yeah,
in?
it definitely plays a role in the timing, right? So like if you're extremely
Mm.
stressed before bed, or if you have anxiety, I always say stress and anxiety are like sleep's worst nightmare. But if
Mm.
you are extremely stressed or extremely anxious, you might delay the onset of sleep by anywhere from 30 minutes up to 2-3 hours even. So that shifting of the bedtime has a direct impact on our circadian rhythm. You're no
Mm.
longer in that, you're no longer in, you might have that homeostatic sleep drive, but you're pushing
Hmm.
everything forward or back depending on how
Yeah.
things are going. So it
Yeah.
absolutely has an effect on our circadian rhythm.
That's already like really good because we got the basis of the research, right? Then we can go on into your what you have done in the past years before we go
Yeah.
into the present. And for the audience, might be very interesting that many studies have been linking circadian and sleep dysfunction to hallmarks of neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. I just have an example for you. So the REM behavior disorder condition, it's a normal condition where muscle paralysis is lost during REM sleep. And over 80% of these patients will eventually develop PD or other subneuropathies, mostly noticeable
Yeah.
decades later. In addition to sleep loss or clock disturbances, have been shown to promote pathways involved in oxidative stress and inflammation, triggering further events in
Yeah.
neurodegeneration. So, Ellie, I would just like to know, we know now that sleep is super important, but how does the circadian rhythm influences the pathology
Yeah,
of these
it's a great
disorders?
point about REM behavior disorder, and it's an incredibly strong predictor for neurodegenerative diseases, in particular alpha synucleinopathies later on in life. Look, when it comes to the circadian component, again, the circadian clock, it kind of acts like a 24-hour maintenance schedule for the brain, right? They
Mm.
time when neurons repair DNA, they clear metabolic waste, they're rebalancing our neurotransmitters. And when that clock, it
Yeah.
drifts off beat because of chronic social jet lag or age-related weakening of the suprachiasmatic nucleus,
Mm.
it's one of the first organs in the brain to calcify. So when all that happens,
Mm.
that like daily housekeeping, it can falter. So there's some evidence that the glymphatic system, which is a glial dependent system in the brain, that's sort of a washing cycle that's responsible for, in part, flushing out things like amyloid beta, tau, things that are known to
Yeah.
be implicated in the pathogenesis of many neurodegenerative diseases, um, which happens primarily during slow wave sleep. If the flushing window, if it narrows or if it shifts to the wrong time of the day, arguably those proteins that should have been washed away, they can linger, they can misfold, they can aggregate. These are core events that we know happen in
Mm.
Alzheimer's and Parkinson's pathology. So essentially, like a misaligned circadian clock, it can scramble like hormonal signals as well. So things like
Yeah.
cortisol and melatonin, if cortisol is peaking, later in the evening, and it stays elevated at a later time of the day, it can keep things like microglia, which is the brain's immune cells, in a chronically activated state. And on the other hand, a more like blunted melatonin rise, it actually can
Mhm.
remove a pretty potent antioxidant shield, which is one of melatonin's many functions. So I think the
Mm.
combined effect is it's a slow motion storm, right?
Mm.
Oxidative stress
Mm.
and inflammation, which can then set the stage for neuronal injury long before some of the clinical symptoms actually appear. And in disorders
Mm.
like REM behavior disorder, the injury, it really, I think it reveals itself as a failure to inhibit motor output during dreaming decades later. And then the same underlying
Mm.
proteinopathy surfaces as like a full-blown Parkinson's disease, potentially, as a result of these dysfunctions in our sleep-wake cycles.
Mm. So it's quite important to get this behavior disorder much earlier, so we can already start preventing or maybe mitigating a bit the
Absolutely.
onset of it. Um, what is known till now? What could restore the circadian rhythm in the brain? So you can counteract actually the neurodegenerative
Yeah.
disorders.
So I think the encouraging news is that yes, we can, restore some of these things. So bright light therapy, which is timed to the morning or the
Mhm.
optimal time based on your circadian rhythm, has been shown in some research to strengthen suprachiasmatic nucleus signaling. There's also some evidence
Okay.
that melatonin, low dose melatonin, can improve daytime performance and subjective sleep quality. But I should preface, this is primarily in older populations with neurodegenerative diseases.
Mm.
I caution younger, healthy individuals from using melatonin.
Exactly.
But there
Yeah.
is some research that it can, improve subjective sleep quality in Alzheimer's and
Mm.
improve actually some motor symptoms and cognition in
Mhm.
Parkinson's. But this is still,
Mm.
there's still a debate about this, and it requires a lot more data. Beyond
Mm.
light and melatonin, there are some behavioral interventions, like consistent wake times, daytime exercise, meal timing, keeping a consistent meal timing. These are all circadian uh, cues, external cues, the Zeitgebers. These are all
Mm.
things that can ideally realign our peripheral clocks. But again, it's still early
Mm.
days to know whether or not they can actually reduce or
Mm.
counter the risk of some of those neurodegenerative disorders.
Mm. And did you hear about a link between eating and gut microbiome and sleep and circadian
Yeah,
rhythm? Because it's quite
yeah, it's
coming up.
still again a
Yeah.
very developing new area, but essentially there is absolutely, well, again, meal timing is one of those external cues that
Hmm.
influence our circadian rhythm. For example, Aura now has launched a meal timing feature as part of their wearable
Hmm.
device and their app, to look at the effects of meal
Hmm.
timing on circadian rhythms and glucose as well. But in terms of
Okay.
micro gut biome, um, yeah, it's still a very interesting area, very early days in terms of the
Mm.
existing research. But essentially, we know that sleep wake dysfunction can disrupt the population, and also disrupt our metabolic functioning, which then has a cascading effect. So
Mm.
it's all very interesting.
Mm.
The question now is, can improving sleep have actually improve gut health as well? And that's a
Exactly.
question
Yeah.
that's still up for
Exactly.
debate.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you also say that depending on what kind of sleep quality you have, people sometimes say they
Yeah,
crave for, let's say, junk food
absolutely.
or whatever. So you think there is a link
We
also?
know there is. We know there is. So there's very clear
Okay.
causal evidence now that sleep deprivation, it balloons levels of, well, it impacts ghrelin and leptin in particular. These are hormones. So it's
Okay.
essentially ballooning levels of our hungry hormones. So
Hmm.
anywhere between 15 to 40%. And then it's suppressing levels of satiety hormones, hormones that are telling our brain that we're full. So yes, there's very clear causal evidence now that sleep deprivation has a cascading effect on hormones that are responsible for satiety and hunger.
So could we maybe say that sleep is quite important to maybe prevent getting obese?
Absolutely. There's a recent study that looked at this in diabetic patients that were overweight. Sorry, I believe they had diabetes as well, where they essentially assigned them to a sleep extension protocol, getting them from, let's say, 6 to 7 hours, and they found that increasing sleep by just an hour was associated with a reduction in caloric intake by around 3 to 400 calories. That's just by sleeping, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's essentially the equivalent of walking an extra, 5 miles or so a day. So just by sleeping an extra
Yeah.
hour. So absolutely, it's a key component to weight loss strategy.
Wow. Okay, that's super
Yeah.
cool to know. When we look now not on neurodegenerative disorders, so we look at anxiety disorders, they also play a prominent role when sleep and circadian rhythm is disrupted, right? And the best known studies are in shift workers, of course. And a meta-analysis of 11 studies concluded night shift workers have 40% higher risk for developing depression through a disrupted sleep system. And in rodent studies on female Siberian hamsters exposed for 4 weeks to dim light at night showed increased depressive-like behavior and neuroinflammation response. So, how does circadian rhythm or the sleep tie in now in anxiety? So that's also an important
Yeah.
component to
Look,
know.
we know that the circadian rhythm regulates the timing of our hormone secretion. So things like, and also the neurotransmitter releases, and obviously the gene expression in the brain that controls our emotion, and also, like, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. These are all significantly impacted by not only sleep deprivation but desynchronized circadian rhythm. So cortisol peaks, occur in the early morning. Serotonin synthesis, it rises through the day, and melatonin increases at night. This typically is supposed to create like a predictable biochemical, like a landscape that supports our mood and our anxiety regulation. Disruption of that core clock, whether it's through irregular sleep schedules, like in shift workers, evening light exposure, excessive light exposure at night, which is very common nowadays, or even some genetic variants in some of those clock genes, we know that they can all alter the timing. So cortisol, for example, when you flip it, cortisol can remain elevated in the night. Serotonin rhythms, they can flatten. Melatonin secretion is delayed, right? These shifts, they can heighten stress reactivity, and they can impair our emotional regulation, which then predisposes people to anxiety and depressive symptoms. One important one as well is not just the circadian rhythm, but sleep architecture. So we know that if we disturb REM sleep in particular, it feeds back to like a worse circadian misalignment. It creates this like self-reinforcing cycle. REM sleep is so important for processing emotional memories. We know that reduction of REM impairs, our ability to process emotions, and it heightens our next day anxiety. And I think over time, the combined effects of like the hormone imbalances, the impaired things like neuroplasticity, inflammation, and the altered sleep architecture, over time they like all converge, right, to raise our vulnerability not just to anxiety and things like depression, but many psychiatric conditions. In fact, the majority of psychiatric conditions have a comorbid sleep issue. There's very few, if any, psychiatric conditions that don't have an
Wow.
accompanying sleep-wake dysfunction.
That's wow. That's super interesting that it has this kind of
Yeah,
two-sided coin,
100%.
right? That
Bidirectional.
exactly. Yeah, totally. Um, Um, exactly. So the question that I wanted to say, so if we have
Mm.
reoccurring bad sleep, would you say that this leads to, at some point, to
Yeah,
depression?
I wouldn't say that any single bad night like guarantees depression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, but
But if it's
yeah,
accumulating
I would say like a
to a certain
pattern,
extent,
yeah, a pattern of short,
mm,
fragmented, or mistimed sleep. It is one of the strongest modifiable risk factors that we know for depression and many mental health conditions or psychiatric comorbidities. Insufficient
mm,
or poorly timed sleep. It again, it amplifies this amygdala activity or reactivity. It's the brain's essentially the alarm
mm,
center, and then it dials down a lot of the uh, neuroanatomical regions that are responsible for like the brakes, like the prefrontal cortex, right?
mm,
Over weeks and months, absolutely, that imbalance can hardwire into a more like negative bias, which can then set the stage for
mm,
many psychiatric conditions.
mm.
I will say there's a lot that we can do. The good news, when it comes to the circadian rhythm, is for those that are looking to actually improve it, is to first and foremost, I would say, anchor your wake time, what time you wake up in the morning, even on days off,
Yeah.
within ideally a 15-20 minute, but up to a 30-minute window. And I say wake time and I don't say bedtime, because for bedtime, sometimes it's less in our control and it can cause anxiety, right? Like if you can't always control when you fall asleep, but you can often control when you wake up in the morning because of your
Yeah.
alarms. The other thing I would
Yeah.
really, really recommend is chasing morning light. So 15 to 30 minutes of outdoor light, if you can couple it with like exercise, this like really powerfully it reinforces the day
Yeah.
phase and raises many of our mood
Mm,
boosting neurotransmitters.
mhm,
And then the other
mhm.
one is dimming light in the last hour to 2 hours before bed. Mimicking the sleep wake the light dark cycle of the sun. um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Really cool. I would like to go on with the latest research in the field of
Yeah.
immunology, because one of your friends is working in that field, and I saw the post that
Yeah.
it's really cool. And it seems to be that circadian rhythm plays also a big role in it, and how, let's say, the immune
Yeah.
cells that we have kind of be in the active state or in, let's say,
Yeah.
sleeping state. And I find this very interesting, specifically because we are going into the world of
Mm-hmm.
chronotherapy, which means you learn when it's good for you to administer certain
Mm-hmm.
drugs. So the body actually gets the most
Yeah.
benefit out of it by having it at a certain time that it can
Yeah.
process it the best, right? And so why would you think is this super important in the sense for immune therapy or chemotherapy? So is this maybe the missing link to improve the overall personalized
Yeah, I'll
medicine?
first touch on why I think it's important when it comes to immune therapy or chemotherapy, and then I'll talk about it being a missing link. First and foremost, we know that
Mhm.
our immune cells, our DNA repair enzymes, our drug metabolism, liver enzymes, they all follow a daily schedule that is set out by our circadian rhythm, our clock. And then when treatment is delivered at a time that matches these highs or lows, I think two really good things happen. The first, in the case of cancer, for example, cancer cells are essentially like hit when they're most vulnerable. And then on the other side, healthy tissues that are we want to preserve, they're treated when
Mm.
they're best able to repair. So there is a lot of evidence
Okay.
now. There was a recent systematic review from neck and head cancers that illustrates this point really, really well. So, for example, patients who received radiation that was timed by their biological clock, their circadian rhythm, versus having it very just late in the afternoon, had a 31% lower risk of severe oral mucitis, which is a very painful mouth ulcer that often limits therapy. We also know that the timing of chemotherapy can actually improve outcomes. So there was another one where they looked at anti-metabolite drugs. When they were given based on a circadian schedule, patients had a 73% lower risk of poor objective responses, and then a 41% lower risk of serious side effects versus a standard untimed dosing. So I think, these results really show that, simply adjusting the clock on like the infusion pump, right, or booking a radiotherapy slot a few hours earlier, depending on your circadian rhythm, it can make treatment far more effective and much more easier to navigate. And to your second question, I think it is the missing piece. I think, personalized oncology, they already tailor many drugs to a tumor's genetics and a patient's metabolism, but they still ignore the when, right? Adding a timing layer is not expensive, right? It's not expensive at all. It's non-invasive. And it's really informed by tools that we already have, things like wearable devices or saliva or blood tests for clock gene expression, right? Even our apps, smartphone trackers, right? To estimate an individual's biological day and night. And I think with that information, clinicians can make really informed decisions about scheduling infusions and radiation therapies that are timed to a patient's optimal window. So yes, I think, I will say though that larger clock guided trials are still needed. But the research is very clear that aligning treatment with the body's own, circadian rhythm, it offers a relatively straightforward, inexpensive, non-invasive way to personalize medicine beyond like what drug to like when to give it. And I think in the future, most prescription medications will have an optimal timing window on the label. Right now we just say, oh, take in the morning, or it doesn't say anything. Take in the evening, right? We'll have an exact time, a window within 20 minutes to take a drug.
Yeah, I also do believe that this is maybe a missing link that we should maybe have it in the future in the administration of drugs or chemotherapies, to also have the opportunity to get the best out of this treatment. So maybe people, I'm not sure if people looked at it, but the remission rate might go high.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
Never know, right?
We have to look at that. That's why these larger trials are needed. And there's I will say it's a very hot topic right now. I think it's actually the future of sleep health in general. I think we've, in some ways cracked the code when it comes to sleep health. The circadian rhythm and optimizing circadian health is the next frontier, right? Like that's what's really exciting me, and it's what's really exciting many people in the industry.
We had the term social jet lag a few times now. And my colleague, actually, Friederike Schäfer, she pointed out that most people unknowingly suffer from the social jet lag. So it describes the misalignment between social and circadian time. So this causes by different social expectations during week and weekends, causing people to often sleep too little and rising too early during the week and staying up too late and sleeping during the weekends, right? So how much would you say is the behavior influencing this social jet lag in the short and in the long run? And particularly when you have this lack of sleep during the week. So would that lead to a shift in sleep-wake cycles then?
Yeah. So first I'll say with social jet lag, it is a huge problem right now. Some estimates have it about 60 to 70% of the global population is suffering from high levels of social jet lag. And the reason why social jet lag is really problematic is because in many ways it mimics traditional travel-based jet lag. But the difference is with travel-based jet lag, let's say you're flying from, East Coast to West Coast in the United States. You're shifted by 3 hours. But guess what? After like a couple of days, your body naturally acclimates and you're fine. Social-based jet lag, this happens every single weekend, right? Where you're essentially taking a transatlantic flight, right? Where like, you finally have off of work on Friday. Finally, you don't have the social requirements to be up early in the morning for work. So you have this accumulating sleep debt or sleep pressure. So what happens? You go out with your friends, which is totally fine, as we should. You stay out later. You go to bed later. Instead of having your typical 10 p.m. Bedtime, you're going to bed at, let's say, midnight. There's a 2-hour shift right there. And then because you get to sleep in on the weekends, guess what happens? Now your wake time is also shifted by 2 hours, maybe even 3 or 4 hours, because you're so sleep deprived that you need to catch up on weekend sleep. Well, right there, you have essentially shifted your clock. You've essentially traveled from Miami, to Los Angeles, or I don't know what the equivalent in Europe would be, but it's a huge change. And again, this happens every single week, right? Where you have this cyclical change, and then you wake up on Monday, your circadian schedule is completely shifted, and you're exhausted. Not because you didn't sleep enough over the weekend, but because now your body thinks it's at a different time than it actually is. So I will say that even like modest misalignment between your work week schedule and your weekend schedule shows up in many measurable health markers. My team has looked at this. We've actually looked at this in our own SleepScore app users, and we found that when we look at this longitudinally, we looked at this in about 130,000 objectively tracked nights. Every extra hour of weekly social jet lag was linked to about a 1.5 kilo rise in BMI. So it's massive.
Wow.
Massive. Short term, we also know that people with more social jet lag, they report more daytime sleepiness, lower mood, again, back with the leptin and ghrelin, a higher affinity toward foods that are higher in caloric density. And then longer term, we know that social jet lag has been tied to higher blood pressure, insulin resistance, increased cardiovascular disease in several studies now. The good news with all this is that, it's not fixed for life, and we can change it. We can change it by, anchoring, as I mentioned earlier, your wake schedule. Start with that, keeping a consistent bedtime and wake time, no more than plus or minus 30 minutes. And as I mentioned earlier, we know it's not fixed for life. When we looked at this data as well, this was recently published in Journal of Sleep Journal of Sleep Research. Using the same objective data, we found that social jet lag falls by about 50% after the age of someone's retirement. So after the age of 65 or so, when social demands relax and people can align more with their internal clock. So it is super important. And going to your original question, what is more detrimental, lack of sleep or shifted sleep-wake cycles? They're both not ideal. If you routinely, are shortchanging your sleep during the week, the health penalty sets in very quickly, right? Like if you're sleeping 4 hours, 5 hours, you will directly feel those effects the next day. In fact, some research shows that sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night is comparable to having a blood alcohol content in your system, like someone who's legally drunk. So imagine how many people are technically legally driving drunk because they're sleep deprived. We know that after just 7 nights of 6 hours of sleep, which many of us get, our reaction times falter, our glucose control and our emotional regulation look like someone who's essentially been completely sleep deprived for 24 hours straight. That's just a week of sleeping only 6 hours, which is not unheard of. Many people do that. I think the circadian layer adds another layer of strain. Sleeping at the wrong biological time, it blunts the restorative power of many of these things. But I will say, if I had to choose just one in terms of health detriments, there's actually some recent research that shows that sleep wake inconsistencies are even stronger predictors of all cause mortality than short sleep duration,
Mm.
right?
Ah,
Which is
okay.
contrary to what many think. You'd think that, well, sleeping less is obviously worse for you than inconsistent bedtimes and wake
Yeah,
times. That might be the case for more
yeah.
short term, but longer term, the inconsistencies are more problematic. So I think the lack of
Ah, that's
sleep
quite
probably
interesting.
does the earliest damage, while the
Mm.
persistent like misalignment, it drives more deeper systemic problems over time.
Mm. Mm. Oh, wow. Okay, that's super good news that we can do something
Yeah,
against it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And be a bit more um, taking care of ourselves a bit more, and give us the 7 to 9 hours that we need, right? Um, Now I'm quite excited because we are coming now to the part where you're gonna talk about what you're doing in the SleepScore Lab. As an introduction for the people, some of us have already used or are using sleep apps to track the quality of sleep. Approximately 30% of the US population uses consumer health technologies for sleep tracking, indicating a significant shift in how sleep data is accessed and used. Moreover, sleep apps are transitioning from simple sleep tracking tools to platforms that can shape the future of population sleep health by offering personalized behavior tools to improve the sleep. And you have shifted your focus on this research by leveraging the big data from consumer sleep technologies to shape the future of sleep medicine. And what I would like to know is, usually, sometimes when you look at, fitness influencers and some doing YouTube videos and so on. So one I look sometimes is Will Tennyson, and sometimes he shows up like, I had a bad sleep and my sleep score is so bad. So I would like to know from you, how good are the sleep apps and the gadget at the moment to provide meaningful data on our sleep quality? And what do you think are the current limitations? Of course, taking now out your app or your devices, or just in general, like what we get
Yeah, look,
now.
I think consumer sleep technologies have come a very long way. Since I mentioned very earlier that my undergraduate research, we used the Jawbone Upband. Many people will probably remember that.
Mhm.
That only had essentially an accelerometer in it. It was able to tell whether or not you were moving. Um, Today,
Mm.
many of the devices have more dedicated sensors like PPG to measure heart rate variability, other sensors that are able to estimate in a more granular way how much we're moving, when we're moving, how we're moving. Now, I would say most wearables estimate total sleep time within about 20 minutes of the gold standard, which is
Mhm.
called polysomnography. But the bigger problem is that
Mhm.
the devices, they vary significantly, right? Some devices are quite accurate relative to the gold standard. One example is the Aura ring. Several of the
Mhm.
performance evaluation studies show that they are quite good at estimating total sleep time. Other
Okay.
devices like the Garmin, but they still show among worst in class when it comes to accuracy. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
variability. There's also the contact-free solutions that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, we'll plug SleepScore's technology. We have the SleepScore app, which uses sonar. It sends inaudible sound waves to the upper body to measure how much we're moving, and our
Oh, wow.
cardiorespiratory. And to my knowledge, we're the only app that has a validation study against the gold standard showing 85+% overall accuracy. So I think, look, the goal for us, and I think the industry as a whole, has been to evolve from more like passive trackers for sleep to
Mm.
using that data in a way that's useful, right? To more
Yeah.
interactive coaches. Um, I will
Mm.
say that there are limitations. None of the consumer devices yet can match with perfection, let's say, full-blown polysomnography when it comes to like detailed sleep staging, like, slow wave sleep or REM sleep. They also can't right now diagnose the full spectrum of sleep disorders. So in-lab clinical PSG or at-home PSG is still required for that. And as I mentioned, the accuracy varies significantly across brands and firmware updates and different sensors. And also, we know that the raw data alone, in some people, it is rare, but in some people, it can create what we call orthosomnia, which is essentially where people become very anxious about every dip in their sleep score. They become
Yeah,
fixated on their
exactly.
sleep
Yes.
data. And I will
Yeah.
say, another limitation right now is that most current apps, they treat everyone to the same advice, right? Even though we know, especially for people with subclinical issues, their sleep symptoms are so varied, they don't provide a personalized approach. And that's really our differentiation as a company, and of course, as an advice engine to improve sleep.
Mm, mm, mm. Um, Maybe hopping on directly on what your Score Lab devices can do or the apps can do, because you're working right now on the next generation of advanced technologies and integrating the principle of detecting reduced sleep. So, what would you say is your novel approach? You
Yeah,
already said that you're trying exactly. Um, um, so, what would be the yeah. So what
our
is
approach.
why should people listen to your app more than
Yeah,
to
it's not
another
just our
one?
app, but it's I think our ethos, the way that we think about sleep improvement. Our team is
Exactly.
trying to
Yeah.
move beyond a one size fits all approach to both tracking and improvement. We've recently launched what's called Sleep AI. It starts with data collection. We always say you can't manage something if you can't measure it. So ensuring that we have enough objective sleep data to phenotype users and do three things. We, one, identify a potential issue, identify a potential cause, and then provide a behavioral solution or a clinical triage if you do have a sleep disorder. So we're able to get devices
Mm.
on 500 plus. We're able to get sleep data on 500 plus devices, or your phone, or if you want to use the SleepScore app or our accompanying radio frequency technology called the SleepScore Max, you can do that as well.
Mhm.
But I also
Mhm.
always say that data without action is just noise, right? Like we need to use that
Mhm.
objective data to provide personalized insights and a behavioral modification program that is dynamic, right? It changes day to day
Mm.
based on your goals and your
Yeah.
sleep issues. And then it has to be hyper personalized, right? The way that we speak to you is very different than the way you should be speaking to me. It should be highly
Mm.
personalized.
Mhm. And you mentioned it before that the devices that you sometimes have are actually not, so you don't have to wear them
Yeah,
anymore.
it's a non.
So can
Yeah,
you,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, no, I just wanted to know, how can I imagine, how does it measure it
Yeah.
actually? How can we measure, envision
Yeah,
that?
so there are many non there our we have two non-contact solutions. One is called the Sleep Score Max, which is using radio frequency, low power radio frequency to essentially see when you are moving and your
Mm-hmm.
cardiorespiratory, like how much you're breathing, the chest compressions,
Oh,
and from that we can very
okay.
accurately stage sleep. We've then bundled that into a software only solution called the SleepScore app, which use a very similar technology, but in what we call sonar. So it sends inaudible sound
Mm-hmm.
waves. And then from that, we can also get your movement throughout the night and then your cardiorespiratory. That gives us a very solid indication as to how much you're sleeping, what kind of sleep that you're getting, and obviously your breathing rate throughout the night. So those are some non-contact
Mm-hmm.
solutions that we have developed, and we have now validated in 14 plus independent publications showing the accuracy relative to the gold standard, which is polysomnography.
Mm. Wow, that's really cool. And I guess artificial intelligence plays a big
Mm.
role So how much of that is in these devices or in your app, for instance? How much do you
Yeah,
rely on it?
it's important. It's, the next leap for us is like context aware coaching, large language models that are trained on sleep science. From a subject matter expert perspective, they can read a full night's sleep data. They can cross check it with, for example, today's calendar. They could, determine whether, light is going to be, they're going to get a sufficient light exposure if they go outside or if it's raining. Right?
Mm,
Every single
mm,
actionable suggestion is provided rather than like a dashboard that's full of non-specific insights. So that at
mhm,
scale, that means we can provide micro interventions, which we already do,
mhm,
but leveraging AI and
mhm,
large language models means we could pull data from additional sources rather
mhm,
than just sleep
mhm,
alone. Um,
mm. So, I- me as someone who feels like my sleep is okay, I would download your app and start giving it data like when do I get up, what do I do, etc., etc., and then it measures over few nights what kind of how deep my sleep is, etc. And then suddenly, if in one cases my sleep score is not that good, it would give me like a pop-up text message saying, "Hey, analyzed your sleep score, and we think, or I think, you should be doing this and this to improve it." Can I imagine that
that's exactly
somehow?
right. So the app essentially phenotypes you. It understands who you are and what your potential
Mhm,
motivations are in terms of improving your sleep. What are the key areas of
mhm,
improvement? What are the likely causes
mhm,
based on some self-reporting that you might do? And then it provides you with a personalized, essentially, guide that includes bite-sized nuggets of information. Like, for example, if we saw
mhm,
that if you reported a lot of caffeine consumption and we saw that over time the caffeine consumption is shortening your total sleep time or making your sleep onset latency, the amount
mhm,
of time it takes to fall asleep, too long, we would provide some
mhm,
recommendations to substitute caffeine with other other solutions that might
mhm.
be still providing you that cognitive boost but might not impact your sleep over time. The same thing for things like stress,
Exactly. Yeah.
anxiety, physical activity.
Mhm,
There's a range of potential factors that can be causing it, and then again we personalize the insights directly to you to give you recommendations that work for you, that are again dynamic and change based on how you're
mhm,
sleeping.
mhm. One thing that I would like to have as a note, or would like to have a discussion with you, is right now when you look at social media, I have the feeling there's this hype of getting to the perfect version of
Mhm.
yourself by overdoing things. So, how could I imagine your app or the devices that you do have, that someone maybe overdo sleeping, like gets
Yeah, we
crazy
we
about it,
talked
you
about it.
know?
That's called orthosomnia, and I think so. There is some data now on this, and I think what we're finding is that orthosomnia can happen if you are seeing data about your sleep with no recommendations, no empathetic user experience or user
Mhm,
interface. It's just like, here you had 5 nights of or 5 hours of sleep, Godspeed. Like that's what a lot of devices are doing right now.
mhm,
They're showing you back that data
mhm,
without any guide or empathy. We don't do that.
mhm,
Our entire approach is to use the data as a means to an end. We only care about the data
mhm.
because it allows us to help you, right? So I think
Okay.
for people who are obsessed with tracking their sleep and coming up with a perfect sleep
Mm,
score, there's some people, and I wrote about this in a recent blog article, there's some people who actually
mm,
shouldn't be tracking their sleep. Maybe some people with generalized
mm,
anxiety disorder or people who are too
exactly.
much of perfectionists wouldn't actually get any
Yeah.
benefit from tracking their sleep. They're
Mm,
better served relying on their own intuition, and reaching
yes.
out to a doctor if they suspect they might have a sleep disorder or other comorbidity that might be impacting their sleep. So that's a small percentage of the population, but they do exist. So for those individuals, I would say, don't utilize any technology that doesn't give you empathy and guidance about your sleep. Use technologies and services that provide that data to you, but only in the context of helping you improve.
What I really like is the empathy part that you have. So you will really stand out by taking this into consideration and not just giving a push message to the consumer and be like, hey, you had a bad sleep. I'm sorry, I cannot help you. So it's more like you're giving really the patient or the consumer the possibility to learn what can they do better later on in the next phase of their sleep.
Absolutely. It starts with empathy. Like it's a very important component of behavior change is empathizing and providing recommendations in a way that meets users where they actually are. Some people are not ready to, to change every aspect of their sleep-wake health. Some people need a gentle nudge. Some people might actually require not a gentle nudge, but more of like a stronger push, or would benefit from like a leaderboard, right? Everyone is very different. And our goal is to create an ecosystem where no matter what your motivation, no matter what your sleep health, there's a place for you. And we provide you with the data and the content and the recommendations in a way that suits your needs from a behavioral perspective and from like a sleep science perspective.
Really amazing. And we come actually to your app that says, so it's in German, Dein Schlaf, dein Tag. But it's in English, you would say your sleep, your day, which tracks the sleep, but also provides, in your case, personalized, dynamic, and evidence-based, which I really like, sleep and circadian advice for sleep hygiene and cognitive behavioral skills. So in that sense, I just wrote down you assessed 412 participants with subclinical poor sleep. And I find it very interesting that it addresses the problems in the circadian rhythm in the subclinical part so good, so well. And that was quite interesting for me to read, because me, as someone who's doing biochemistry, molecular biology in the context of you name it, cancer or whatever, having that kind of so you are doing research, but with a completely different twist, and that was something that I really liked. So this whole translational translational sleep medicine approach is really something that really caught me totally off guard. And I would like to know, can the app be used alongside other sleep aids or therapies, or is it meant to be a standalone solution?
It works both ways. So for someone with a treated sleep disorder, it can be used as like an adjunct behavioral tool or a way to track your sleep and see like the measurable impact of, any kind of clinical intervention that it's having on you. It's a very low burden first step as well, But if you have poor sleep and you're looking for like a one-stop shop, this can help guide you to better health. It's not a replacement for a medical device or therapy. So for example, if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you still require not only a diagnosis, which doesn't happen very often, unfortunately, many cases of sleep apnea remain undiagnosed, 90%, but you need a treatment for it. Like, telling you to improve your sleep hygiene is not going to help you breathe better throughout the night and reduce your apnea, risk, hypopnea scores. So I would say it can be a standalone if you're looking to improve your general sleep health and need recommendations to do that. But it can also support some people who are looking for adjunct behavioral therapies.
So I'm quite skeptical with all these devices sometimes. So I don't have them. So I just
Yeah.
don't track it. But I find another really cool paper that you wrote about a smart goggle that promotes relaxation, having a positive impact on the overall sleep health. That was also quite mind-blowing for me. And this pilot study examined 20 participants over the course of several weeks with, of course, questionnaires and measuring the sleep quality by
Polysomnography.
polysomnography validated non-contact biomotion device. I got it. So for me, that was quite interesting because I would envision that the goggle would be for some people very not that like a very pleasant thing to do. So why would you or do you think that this goggle, or why did the 20 participants think that this goggle really
Yeah,
helped
so
them?
it's
Because
intended to improve relaxation before bed. So it uses some vibroacoustics, so some gentle vibration, which is intended to help relax you. There's also some temperature regulation in there. It can heat a little bit, which can put you in a more relaxed state. And in many ways, it's intended to be like this pre-sleep routine that many people can do before bed. That is intended to, to remind them that it's time to shift and wind down. Obviously, it's completely blocking light as well, so it's a great feature for meditation as well. And it's actually very, very comfortable. So it's a really
okay.
lovely thing to put on. It's not super heavy. It doesn't hurt. It's beautiful fabric. So
Mm.
and also this one in particular is not intended to be worn overnight. So you put it on before bed, you use it for a little bit, that puts you into a more relaxed state, and then you can take it off. There
Mm-hmm.
are other versions of it where you can leave on overnight. So that
Mm.
that's what it was for. It was for. It's intended to
Mm.
to unlike medication or some other pharmacological approaches,
Mm.
this is there's no risk of things like tolerance or morning grogginess, and it adds like a
Exactly.
tactile product that isn't many people can find more grounding and more relaxing.
Mm-hmm. And are you expanding the studies now on larger cohorts that you can see what kind of, because 20
Yeah,
participants is a bit
yeah.
low.
It's
So
small, but I will say, unlike many other health areas, the
mhm.
statistical power comes not necessarily from the
Mm.
number of participants, but it comes from the length of the study and the number of nights recorded, which is really important for sleep research
Okay.
because sleep
Mhm.
really waxes and wanes. So this was
Mm.
a bit of a lot of our studies have upwards of like a 4-week baseline, 6-week intervention period, crossover, right? So it's much
Mm.
more long term than
Mm.
a typical intervention study that's just looking at 1 day or 2 days. So yes, you're right
Mhm.
that it's still a pilot, it's a smaller study. Um,
Mm.
but a lot of our studies are sufficiently powered to detect differences because of the sheer number of nights that we're able to record. So, but yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Like a lot of our research, as you saw in the randomized control trial for the app, it had upwards of, we originally included about 500 people. And then after
Mm.
inclusion exclusion, we had about 412. So
Mm.
it
Mhm.
depends on the intervention. It depends on the expected improvement and a range of other factors.
Mm. Mm. Maybe as a last question to that, since it's really interesting, the app, and we also already talked that we might have this
Mm,
genotype. So since I'm coming from the proteomics
mm.
field, if you're planning to measure blood plasma, like the cortisol, serotonin, or melatonin level even, an indicator for good sleep, or maybe finding other proteins that are quite interesting to look at. And what would you think, and maybe what would be speaking against it to do
Yeah,
it?
look, I think biomarkers would definitely clarify mechanism, but they're really challenging in like a home environment. So, for example, nighttime blood draws, They're invasive, right? And they would disrupt sleep.
Mm,
Salivary melatonin, I did it during my PhD. It's still very
mm,
intrusive, and it requires dim light sampling and very strict timing. I think for
mhm,
now we're really prioritizing the high fidelity, high quality, non-contact sleep measurement. If future
mm,
studies move to a more lab home type hybrid, because right now all of our studies are done in the participant's own home, then I think if we had
mhm,
that, then maybe time saliva or dried blood spots that could be added to map hormonal changes, without undermining
mm,
the like ecological validity of sleeping in your own bed. So I think for us it's super
mhm.
interesting. Obviously, from a sleep science perspective, I would love to have all that. The question for us
Mm,
is it required from a product perspective, right? Because we are a B2B,
yeah,
we're a business to business company providing sort of research
yeah.
as a service. So it would incur
Mm,
additional costs. So is it required? Does it provide enough granularity that moves the needle? And is it feasible? Like that's, recruitment,
mm,
retention,
yeah.
those are all very difficult things. And if you have to have an added burden of collecting those things, it can make
Mm,
retention very difficult.
mhm. Um, we are reaching the end of our conversation already. But before we wrap up, I would like to give you the opportunity to talk about some really interesting stuff that is right now happening. We're really excited to share. And also, maybe if you want to give or address a common misconception or even misinformation in the field of sleep or circadian rhythm research that you would like to address and tell the people that don't do it or
Yeah,
you know.
what I would start by saying is that if you suspect that you have a real sleep issue that's really impacting your day to day health, it's always important to speak to your doctor, right? Like that, first and
Yeah.
foremost, rule out a clinical sleep disorder, and then recognize that there is no silver bullet when it comes to sleep health. We've published some
Mm,
data showing that there is no one single behavior that is associated
yeah.
with better sleep. It was only when we looked at
Mm,
sleep hygiene as the sum of its parts where we saw that better overall sleep hygiene is associated with better overall sleep. And it makes sense, right? Like you can have the most consistent bedtime and wake time in the world, but if you're still having a coffee at 10 o'clock at night, or you're exercising
yes.
too close to bed, or you have an
Yes. Yeah.
underlying sleep disorder, none of that matters. So it is really the sum of its
Mm,
parts. I will also say don't don't buy into the hype that sleep is this end all be all. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but as you mentioned earlier, we can
yes.
become so obsessed, and this is with any behavior.
Mm,
We can be so obsessed that we start to worry and we start to stress ourselves out. And I always say that stress and anxiety are sleep's worst nightmare. So you're going to be okay.
mm,
We talked a lot about some scary stuff today, but like one poor night of sleep or even a week of poor night of sleep, it's not going to kill
mm,
you. You're going to
yeah.
be okay. It's important that you just recognize that, but rule out things that can be contributing to poor sleep over the long
Exactly.
run.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's quite the best take-home message that we can give, right? Without stating Brian Johnson that everyone should do what he's doing. It's crazy, and I wouldn't recommend that, even though it's
Yeah.
maybe quite some science is based in it and some not.
Perfect
So,
sleep doesn't, yeah,
but I
perfect
think
sleep doesn't exist. You're not going to get
yeah,
100 sleep score every night.
exactly,
It's
exactly. And he's n equals one, so it means for you and me it could be completely different. Yeah, maybe as a last question, what holds the future of sleep and circadian research for you, and what will be the next thing, the big thing, in
Yeah, I
your
think the
opinion?
next big thing, which we're already getting, is the incredible value of artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
creating this sort of interconnected ecosystem, right, of digital tools to improve population sleep health, whether that's an integration of the TV that has a RF sensor embedded that's able to measure your sleep without touching you, or a circadian sensor in your kitchen and in your refrigerator that's able to estimate your circadian rhythm based on when you're eating and what you're eating, an embedded, light system inside of your house, right? Like all of this interconnected devices that make sleep health and circadian health seamless. It's no longer top of mind, so that all the things that you need in order to sleep well and have circadian health are just happening in the background with you not having to do anything. And I think really just access to measurement and interventions that meet users where they actually are. That's what's super exciting, because everyone is so unique in their motivations and their goals and their sensitivities. We will soon, I hope, have a completely interconnected digital and product-related ecosystem that can deliver the improvements that we're looking for in a non-invasive way that's incredibly seamless.
Okay, really cool. So we have reached our conversation with Dr. Elie Gottlieb. Thanks again, Elie, for your time. And maybe we will have you back for another episode if you want. If you got interested in Dr. Gottlieb's work, please make sure to follow him on Instagram. His name is @Dr. Elie Gottlieb, and of course on LinkedIn. Links you can find as usual in the description box. Please make sure, if you enjoyed our conversation, that you give a like, and if you want to see more great episodes with future scientists and medical professionals, please make sure that you don't forget to follow and subscribe. Elie, as you know, I have a slogan at the end of my podcast, and I would love to know if you are willing to say that with me together. Do you have it,
I see it
open? Okay, perfect. 1, 2, 3. Let a little dose of honest science in your life and brighten up your day. Awesome. Really cool. Thank you so much. And we guys see us in the next episode. Have a great time. See you. Bye.
Daily dose of honest science.